Radio 9 WCME, the Midcoast Morning Buzz. Our guest this morning is Representative Mattie Daughtry. She represents the House District 66, which is part of Brunswick, a lifelong resident of Brunswick, and she's a graduate of Brunswick High School and also Smith College. Mattie, thank you so much for coming in this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Now, it says on your website that you work to hold special interest accountable and make Augusta accessible to everyone by publicizing what is behind each bill. In war, the first victim is truth. In politics, it seems to be accountability. How do you do that? How's that working out for you?
It's working out fairly well. My goal is to, whenever I have a bill that I care about or one that's coming before the legislature, I've been trying to use my blog as a place to, at first, just publicize what the bill is and try to not take a stance. Let folks know what's behind it, what's the intent, what it would accomplish if passed, what I've heard about what's going on behind the bill. And then my big goal is to just tell people where they can go in Augusta to tell people what they think about it. I think the best way to hold folks accountable is to get people to participate in government. And that's my goal, is to get a lot of folks up there to tell us what they think. And so far, I have to say, my district's been doing a phenomenal job of coming up to Augusta and testifying, and that's probably my proudest achievement thus far.
You mentioned the blog that you write and you update. How do people read that if they want to see it?
It's on my website, which is www.mattiedaughtry.com. For those of you who don't know how to spell my nickname, it's Mattie, and my last name is Daughtry, Daughtry, so it's mattiedaughtry.com.
And just to be clear, your full name is Mathia. Am I pronouncing
correct.
that correctly? But everybody calls you Mattie. I think
Yes.
that's the first thing I ever heard you say at a forum on guns that you held shortly after you took office.
Yes.
Here in Brunswick.
Yes, no, everyone, I was named for my nickname. I'm named after my great-grandmother, who was a seamstress on Roanoke Island, but my parents didn't want my full name to be Martha, so they went with Mathia.
Let's probe your thoughts on a few current issues. And this first one I'm going to raise is very much top of mind this morning, and you may not know a whole lot about it, but you may. Mm-hmm. And I have found you to be pretty up to date on almost everything.
Well, thank you.
But the story basically goes like this, or at least this is how it has been presented this morning. Here, lawyers representing workers in unemployment benefits cases say they plan to ask Maine's Attorney General Janet Mills to look into claims that Governor LePage put pressure on unemployment hearing officers to rule in favor of business owners over employees. Democratic lawmakers in the union that represent state workers are also quite concerned about a meeting held by the governor back in March, apparently at Blaine House, with about 8 hearing officers and their supervisors. Spokesman for the governor is disputing claims that he tried to sway the hearing officers. This all apparently stems from a story that I think was broken a few days ago by the Lewiston Sun. But what do you know about this?
I know about as much as everyone else. This is a story that just broke recently on the Sun Journal. It's something I've been following because, I'll be honest, I'm deeply disturbed by the reports. I really do think an investigation needs to be held. How can a citizen of Maine go in to appeal their case if they feel like the system's already rigged? I'm concerned that it's an ongoing continuation of sort of a culture of fear that we've been seeing in Augusta under the LePage administration. And I hope we can find out what's going on and make sure that everyone, employees and employers, are getting a fair trial. We shouldn't have anyone intervening in that system.
I assume you don't mind me asking this next question because you told me about it last Saturday. You had a little personal run-in with the governor after you were critical of him, I believe, in a story that was picked up by the Portland Press-Herald.
The Bowdoin Orient, actually.
Okay, but you've also received some wider publicity for some of your criticisms of the governor, and he was not happy about that, and you and he had a bit of a confrontation in Augusta.
I wouldn't call it a confrontation so much as a conference. I have to say, for once in my career, I actually want to thank the governor. I was really impressed at how he handled our meeting. We were meeting over my bill, LD 668, which just passed with unanimous approval as amended by my committee, the Education Committee, and I wanted to present my bill to him and see what he thought and get some feedback. And I'm sitting there, and he pushes a story across the table that where I called him a bully, and he wasn't too happy about it. And so I have to say, to his credit, we talked about it. I told him where I was coming from. I mentioned a town hall I'd attended that he'd been at, and frankly, I thought he'd been a little bit rude, and we disagreed a little bit about that. And I have to say, we came to terms, laughed about it, and then actually moved on to some really thoughtful discussion. And so, thank you, Governor.
You seem to be expressing something that occurred to me when I didn't exactly meet the governor the other day when he spoke here to the Southern Midcoast Chamber of Commerce in Brunswick, but I was there, and I was covering it for this radio station. And I have read all about the governor a great deal. I've seen him on television, heard him on other radio stations. Actually, I heard him on this one last weekend because we started to cover his regular radio address, which is being responded to by John Richardson, the Brunswick town councilor who used to be Speaker of the Maine House of Representatives. But in just seeing him up close the other day, you do get a more human take on him than you might watching television and listening to some of his outbursts. I mean, he can tell a joke, he can make people laugh, he can tell personal stories, and he can be personally appealing. That sounds like where you were going a moment ago.
I think so. I think anyone, that we see in the headlines that sort of becomes a caricature of their own self, there is always a human side. And I was pleased to finally get to meet the governor and actually, get to have a conversation. But I think my biggest problem with the governor right now is, I try to hold myself to a higher standard, and I know he loves the state. That's why he's governor. I love the state too. And I wish he would just speak a little highly of it and not disparage its citizens so much, because I know, having met with him, he's absolutely passionate about what he's doing. He wants to make, a more prosperous future for the state. I just wish he'd be a little more careful in conveying that.
Well, I will say in the course of his remarks the other day, he did hit that one head on. He said, I hear my critics, and I think he was particularly upset at the particular moment the other day about John Baldacci having done some kind of an interview in which he accused LePage of just being too negative about the state. And he said, I hear this from people, and he even seemed to take the point to a certain extent. I think he said, I plead guilty on some level, but we have big problems in this state that we have to address and fix. So that's his defense.
Well, that's good to hear. That sounds like a complete change. But I'm glad to hear that. I have to say, another reason I decided to run is because he was disparaging Maine students. And I graduated from Brunswick High School, and I received a fabulous education. Was there room for improvement? Yes. But my teachers made me who I am, and I was very excited to take a stand and say that I received a great education in Maine, and I came back. So.
Well, he also acknowledged that there are some good schools in Maine, and he said he's trying to fix the bad ones. And, he actually talked quite a bit about education. We can go into that at a later moment. But a few other very current issues. 40 gun rights people showed up, and I know you have an interest in the gun issue because you held a forum on it shortly after you took office, pretty well-attended forum at the Curtis Library here in Brunswick. 40 gun rights activists showed up in Augusta in support of a bill that would eliminate the need for a permit to carry a concealed weapon, which has been on the books in this state for almost a century. Is this going anywhere?
I am not on the Criminal Justice Committee. Our local state senator, Senator Stan Krasowski, is the chair of that committee, and he's a better expert on his opinion. But from my own personal side, I understand that folks want to have, their rights protected and potentially expand their rights. But when it comes to a dangerous firearm that could kill, I will not be voting in favor of getting rid of any concealed permitting.
On the broader issue of guns, where do you stand? How far should we go in regulating guns in the aftermath of events like Newtown and there have been others?
We need more gun control. Now, what I find frustrating is on both sides of this argument, someone says that and they jump up and say, you're stepping in the way of my rights. That's not what I mean by gun control. I want to make sure that law-abiding gun owners are still protected, and I think increased gun control will protect those folks more. I'm for universal background checks. I think that's very necessary, and for those of you who are at the gun forum I held, we heard from Police Chief Mark Hagan, and he raised several points that he found worrying about the current law that he thought could be improved to protect all of us, whether we own a gun or not. He said that we need to increase the listing for domestic violence for folks who have just recently committed an offense so their guns can't be returned, so that their families and their loved ones are safe. I'm also interested in making sure that we close any loopholes with gun shows, as well as making sure that the legal owners of the guns know where those guns came from. So that's sort of broadly where it's coming from. But I have to say, I've been having some great conversations across my district with folks on all sides of the issue, and I really appreciate having this ongoing dialogue that's really sort of shaping where I'm standing on this issue.
Just a couple other things. I'm guessing that you supported an increase in the minimum wage.
Absolutely.
What do you make of it? It's kind of surprising to me on some level that Governor LePage is hedging on this. We asked him the other day, that was the first question when he came out of the chamber speech, what are you going to do with this bill that's now passed both houses of the legislature to raise the minimum wage in stages to $9 by 2016? To listen to LePage talk about his economic philosophy, you would conclude that he doesn't even believe that there should be a minimum wage law in the first place, much less raise it. So are you surprised that he's hedging on this, and what do you think is going on there?
I am surprised, but pleasantly, and I think he's really waiting to see how the political climate continues. He's looking for cooperation and a bipartisan approach to the liquor bill, as well as paying off the hospital debt, and it's something I think we are approaching with great bipartisan cooperation. So I imagine on this bill, he is listening to the fact that both the House and the Senate passed it, and hopefully giving it an honest look and seeing what would benefit Maine people. So I hope he'll sign it. I gave one of my first floor speeches was on this bill. It's one of the things I ran on. We really need to have a living wage.
Governor also told the chamber the other day that if the hospital debt, and it's substantial, $484 million, isn't paid off soon, the credit ratings agencies will sock the state. The credit rating will fall. The state could face notably higher borrowing costs. And he says, you Democrats really don't care much about this hospital debt situation, and if you did, you would have moved on it sooner.
I disagree with that, as I'm sure you all can imagine. And you have to look at, what's been going on for the past 8 years, and Governor Daughtry was moving to pay off the hospital debt. He put in one of the first plans to pay off the hospital debt. It just happens we still have more to pay off, and we do need to pay that off. But one interesting sort of twist in this whole conversation that we had presented before our committee, we had a student, I'm trying to remember, he was a freshman in high school, and unfortunately I'm forgetting what town he's from, but he walked in and he says, I pick up a newspaper when I'm at my house and I read that Maine needs to pay its bills, it needs to pay its hospitals. And the kid goes, I absolutely agree, but I think we have a bigger debt we need to pay, and that's to our students. And if we're going to talk about paying bills, we need to pay our school debt as well. And so now every time I discuss or think about the hospital debt, I just hear this kid's voice in my head, and he's absolutely right. We have a lot of places we need to be making investments.
Mattie, it would be rude for me to ask your age, but the number 25 did come up in some of the research we've done. You have an incredible head on your shoulders. You're so passionate about what you're doing. Now, old dogs like Jim and myself have seen young folks like yourself get into politics only because it's a family tradition. Then we see people get into politics because they've had successful careers in business or law, and they want to further their agenda. At your tender age and everything you've accomplished, how do you find that? Is this a help or a hindrance now? And are you seeing more younger people getting involved? If not, how can they?
Well, I'm actually now 26. I just turned 26. I am also the youngest woman in the Maine legislature, which is very interesting. I'm not the youngest representative. Justin Chenette is the youngest representative from Saco. He's 21 years old. Representative Josh Plant from Berwick is the second youngest. He's 25. And more young people are getting involved. In this past election, we elected 14 legislators under the age of 30. I am the co-chair, along with Representative Matt Pluiot, of the Youth Caucus. We're a group of legislators who come together to focus on making sure that young Mainers and other young folks can come to Maine to work, live, and play. And we're supporting legislation that accomplishes that gives us an economic future and gives our children's children an economic future. So I think there is a movement afoot in politics. We see that our future's on the line, and we want people who have a long-range vision to be up in Augusta and really, making our future herd is sort of the line we keep talking about.
Let me follow up, though, for a moment on this youth issue in a way that perhaps affects you in particular. I've covered a number of state legislatures around the country, and they're all the same to the extent that seniority is always a huge deal. I mean, I've never seen, just as is the case in Washington and Congress, legislative bodies just love seniority. They run toward it like moths go to flames. And I mean, it always happens, even in the most progressive states. So here you are, you're a little while ago you were 25, you're now 26. You are not only young, you are female in what I believe is still a largely male legislature, right?
Yeah.
Although there are more women. You're not only a young female, but you're a young, outspoken female. You sound off and speak up when you feel like it, even though you're new, brand new in the legislature. So what kind of reaction do you run into from some of the older male leaders of the legislature, who I'm sure a part of them, and it may be an unconscious thing in a lot of ways, but they really may not even think you belong there, sitting next to them?
Well, I have to say, I really found my own meeting with the governor. You really know if you can stand your ground once you meet with him.
Yeah, I would say so.
Absolutely. But I do think it is a male-oriented profession and a male-dominated profession. Maine has a higher rate of female legislators than some other states, which I'm really, really proud of. But I'm the youngest one. There's a lot of other young men. It really still is something that women don't think of doing. And I don't know what the more senior male members of the House think, but I've been doing a good job of befriending them, and I don't really sort of look at it in terms of male or female. I think more of, it's a team sport and learn as much as I can from their experience and wisdom. But if I can real quick talk about the gender issue, one of my greatest goals being in office is to try to get other young women interested in politics. I don't know if you've heard the story, but my godmother was a state rep, Charlene Raydell, and my mother, Mattie Daughtry, and my parents, they were always involved in politics. And I was 6 years old, and they decided to volunteer at the Democratic headquarters. And so they had me watching the TV, and I was supposed to call out when something happened in the 1992 election. And I got kind of bored. And I've always been an arty kid. I work as an artist. And I decided that it looked like fun, and if they could do it, I could run for president too. And so I made my own signs, and I went out on Main Street, and I held them up, and I'm sure they were misspelled, and it was like Mattie for president, and people were humoring me. And then a older man came up to me, patted me on the head, and said, "Oh, that's cute. You can't be president. You're a girl," and walked off. And I ran into the headquarters crying, and the women and the men in there picked me up and said, "That's just because women haven't done it. That's why you have to get involved in politics." And so I ask every young girl I meet to think about politics, because I'm part of a new wave of young legislators who realize that more women need to get involved in leadership to impact real change.
Mattie, how do people get in touch with you?
They can find me on my website, which I said once again is MattieDaughtry.com. They can also contact the House Majority Office through the Maine Legislature, but all my contact info is on my website, which once again is MATTIE Daughtry, DAUGHTRY.com.
And I want anybody who thinks that Mattie Daughtry, at the young age that she is, might not be up to this job, to know that at the gun forum you held at the Curtis Library here in Brunswick, this woman even shut down her own father when he perhaps rambled on just a little bit too long at this meeting. We old people tend to go on and on and on, and we need young people like
All right, Jim,
yourself.
I'm shutting you off. Our guest this morning has been Representative Mattie Daughtry of House District 66 here in Brunswick. Mattie, thank you so much for coming in, and let's do it again.
Thank you. It's always an honor to be here, and it's an honor to serve my district. So
All right.
Thank you.
Radio 9 WCME.